So this is our second shiur on Chanukah. And as I mentioned last week we spoke about Hallel, and I said that this week we will speak about some sugya about the mitzvah of Adlokas Ner Chanukah. Chanukah is such a broad and fascinating sugya. There's so much to talk about. So today's shiur is a combination about the two most fundamental questions regarding Ner Chanukah. Where and when? Where do we light Chanukah Licht and when? And before speaking about where or when, I want to ask a fundamental question, and as it'll become obvious as the shiur unfolds, both questions we are dealing with depend on this fundamental assumption and definition. Last week I mentioned the Posuk in Tehillim Perek Kuf Zayin, and that is a very substantial Perek. It is the Perek from which we learn Arba Tzrichem Lahoidos. It is the most central expression of gratitude, of thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is the Perek from which we learn the halachas of Hoidoya, of Berches HaGoyim L'Chasod L'Chayovim Toivim. And in that Perek there's a posuk which in my eyes is so fundamental. Yoidu L'Shem Chazdoi V'nifla'oisav L'vnei Adam. When a person is zeichet to a nes, and he is aware of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's chasadim, he has two different obligations. Both rest upon him. Yoidu L'Shem Chazdoi, thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, expressing your thanks and gratitude. But that is not enough. V'nifla'otav L'vnei Adam. Make others aware. B'mekadei Shemayim. That is the ultimate goal of this world. Yizgadal v'yizkadash Shemei Rabo. So the Pasuk says, Yoidu L'Shem Chasdo v'nifloisev l'vnei Yodam. And last week I explained, why does the Rambam put Hallel before Adlukas Ner? Because Yoidu L'Shem Chasdo comes before nifloisev l'vnei Yodam. But today, we're not talking about Hallel. Hadlokas Ner Chanukah into itself, is it all about Persumei Nisa, or is it fundamentally Zeichel L'Nes? Because in many sources in Shas, in Poiskim, we find the concept of Zeichel L'Nes. That is not Persumei Nisa. Sholosh Regolam al Zeichel, all the dinam of Bechorah, Bechor Odom, Bechor Behemet Tohira, Bechor Behemet Tamer, all Zeichel L'Nes. We find big sugis in Shas that we make a Zeichel L'Migdosh Kehillel, Kain also Hillel. So is Ner Chanukah Zeichel L'Nes and also Persumei Nisa, or is it only Persumei Nisa? So this very same posuk I quoted before and I quoted last week, Yoidu L'Shem Chasda v'noisel v'nei Yodam. So one interpretation we suggest that is Hallel and Ner. But now I say both could refer to Ner Chanukah. Yoidu L'Shem Chasdo is just recognition, awareness. In order to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you need to be aware of His chasadim, of His mercy. Nifla'oisev l'vnei Yodam is Persumei Nisa. And I think this is a fundamental machlokes between Rambam and Torah, which has far-reaching ramifications in halacha. So today we will be discussing Zman Adloka and the Mokom Adloka. Let's start with Zman. Before we deal with the question where, when. So in the beginning of the Sugya of Ner Chanukah, Mishetishkecha mod shetichol regel min hashok. Machlokes Rishonim, what does Mishetishkecha mean? Shechanoch Paskins, Tzeisak Echovim. The Litvish Oilim, by far and large, act according to the Gra. The Gra maintains it's the Shkia. That's when we start lighting, and the lights, the candles, need to burn ad shetichla regel min hashok. For many generations, the Rif, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch write approximately a half hour. This is a discussion we won't have today, but in my Chuvas and my Svorim I wrote that it's very reasonable to argue that today Tichla Regel Menashuk is far later than a half hour. In practicality, anybody that will light on the Shkia and his candles burn for a half hour does 0 Presum Nissa, especially if you live among Shomer Mitzvahs in Yerushalayim. From the Shkia to a half hour later, nobody's going to see your lights because everybody is busy with his own Ner Chanukah. So who's out there on the street? It is only the paramedics rushing to an accident. Who's going to see your Ner Chanukah? So I think Ache Tichla Regel Menashuk today is far later. So how come from the Rif to the Shulchan Aruch, that spans 800 years, 900 years, everything was the same? Yes, not much change. Electricity brought about a dramatic change in lifestyles. So from the days of the Mishnah, and probably way before that, till 200 years ago, yes, people came home at nightfall. Many sources in Chazal we find that people were afraid to leave their homes by night. The bears and the wolves came out of the forest. Robin Hood came out of the forest. The crooks and the thieves. And the mazikim, which we don't exactly know who they were. So at nightfall, people rushed home. After electricity, everything changed. And it depends where you live. If you live in a Haredi community, then 1 o'clock in the morning, people are still out there. Avrechem coming home from Koil Erev, Bar Mitzvahs, Chasanas, Sheva Brochas, Baruch Hashem. Besides a bris, everything happens by night in our society. So this is a separate discussion which we won't have today, but this is a clear halachic question. Tichla Regel Menashuk, what time is that? But fundamentally, the Rambam paskins, if you didn't light Neres Chanukah ad Tichla Regel Menashuk, you lost the mitzvah. And there's no point in lighting later. And if you said a brocha, it's a brocha levatola. Ad Tichla Regel Menashuk, according to the Rambam, is ma'akev b'di'eved. The Tur paskins, Tov, Reish, Ayin, Beis. Lo yidlek Tichla Regel Menashuk, he could be madlek ad alois hashachar, with a brocha. What is the machlokes? The Rambam maintains Ner Chanukah is about Persum Nissa, and only Persum Nissa. Yoidu L'Shem Chasdei would be Hallel, not Ner Chanukah. Ner Chanukah is about Persum Nissa, and therefore La'achar Shekol Tzareg Menashuk. There's no one out there. You're not making Persum Nissa. It's a brocha levatol. You have no mitzvah. The way I understand the Tur, Ner Chanukah is first and foremost about Zeichel Nes. It's not only about them, it's about you. Zeichel Nes. Like many other mitzvahs, Menatoira and Midrabanon, that are Zeichel Nes. And a Zeichel Nes is not only for others, it's not only for the Rishus Harabim. It's about you, it's about your family, it's about yourself. And therefore, Lechatchila, of course, you need to light Lefnei Shekol Tzareg Menashuk. Everybody agrees that Ner Chanukah is about Persum Nissa. My question is it only Persum Nissa, or is it also Persum Nissa? The Rambam maintains it's only about Persum Nissa, and therefore, Kol Tzareg Menashuk, no point. You lost your mitzvah. Try to be better tomorrow. The Torah says no. Lechatchila, you got to do Persum Nissa. But if you lost Persum Nissa, you still have the chiyuv of Zeichel Nes, and therefore madlik v'hoilech umevorech ad alois hashachar. Once again, the question when is a fascinating question, and it touches upon many different halachas. Shulchan Aruch paskins, and this is the shit of Mari Abuhav, b'shas adchak you can light even before the shkia. Miplaga mincha. The Marshal makes a compromise. The Marshal says till Chatzos, not after Chatzos. But what we are dealing with primarily is the Rambam and the Tur. According to the Rambam, ad shetishkechamo, you lost your mitzvah. According to the Tur, alois hashachar. The way I understand this machlokes is Zeichel Nes or exclusively Pirsume Nisa. This brings us to question number 2. Not when, but where. So once again, Chazal clearly say, Al Pesach Beisoy Mebechutz. Is that Me'akev? So Chazal speak about 3 different options. Ner Chanukah mitzvah lanich al Pesach Beisoy Mebechutz. Emo yedar ba'aliyah, chaloy nasomach l'shus harabim. Lives on the 2nd floor, window, facing l'shus harabim. B'shas ha'sakona manichoy al sholchonoi v'dayoy. And my question is, shelo b'shas ha'sakona. But he was madlik ner Chanukah within his private domain. No presum enes l'rabim. Is he yoitza or not? Fundamentally, there are 2 different minhagim today in the Jewish world, in the frum world. Most of the people in Eretz Yisrael are madlik al Pesach abayis mebachutz. You know those little glass boxes that are very popular in Eretz Yisrael? You put your Chanukah in a little glass box, al Pesach beisur mebachutz. Most of the Hasidim are madlik in their private homes. Living room door. Mezuzah yamin, ner Chanukah mismoil. Minig avoiseyem biyadeyem. Many years ago, I think it was about 50 years ago, or maybe even more than that, 2 great Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael had a correspondence, and it's a fascinating correspondence. Somewhat amusing, but primarily fascinating. Reb Shiur Mendel Ehrenberg was one of the greatest Dayanim in the post-Holocaust period. He was a Belze Chosed Belevu Benefesh Ramach Evorim Vishasa Agidim. He was one of the greatest and most important prominent Dayanim in Eretz Yisrael, Reb Yeshua Menachem Ehrenberg, and he wrote a Sefer Shalos Teshuvas Dvar Yoshua. I knew him. As a bocher, he learned together with my great Rebbe, with the Kloiser Mager Rebbe, in the yeshiva of Reb Tevel Adikler. Reb Tevel Adikler was one of the great Gedolim in pre-Holocaust Galicia, murdered by the Nazis, Hashem Yinkum Domoi. The Kloiser Mager Rebbe was his Talmud Muvak, and so was Reb Shiur Mendel Ehrenberg. Sefer Dvar Yoshua Chelak Aleph Siman Mem. Lo neskararu datoi, and he reaches a conclusion that those that are madlak al Pesach bayis mebachutz lo yotzu yedei chavosam. Sounds strange, doesn't it? It sounds strange, and I think it is strange. Why would one say, if you're a madlik, kedina di gemora al Pesach bayis mebachutz, you weren't yotza? So he develops a theory at Rav Ehrenberg with his ga'inus, that when Chazal said b'shas zakona manich al shalchonoi v'dayoi, they were mevatel the original tkon of Pesach bayis mebachutz, and they altered Mukom Adlokas Chanukah al Shalchonai B'toch HaBayis. He bases his argument on a sugi at the beginning of Ksubis Dav Gimel. When he learned the sugi in Ksubis, it's not a convincing argument. Hidgish esaso, it's an exaggeration. Kovetz Shuvis Harav Elyashav Chelak Aleph Siman Samech Zayin. We find a letter from Rav Elyashav to Rav Ehrenberg. And Rav Elyashav thanks him for sending me your Choshev a Sefer. It's a Gavaldige Sefer. But when I looked in Siman Mem, Rav Elyashav writes somewhat cynically, when I look at the caption, the heading, I thought you're coming to B'miyashav Minik Chasidim. I didn't imagine that you're going to come to a conclusion that those that light al Pesach Bayis Mechutz aren't Yotzei Dechavosoi. You went a bit too far, Rav Elyashav writes to Rav Ehrenberg. Rav Elyashav's opinion was that those that light in the house are not Yotzei Dechavosam, and I humbly think Rav Elyashav also went too far. And these 2 Gedolim, right and left, both Hidgishu esaso. And I think those that light outside, needless to say that they're Yotzei, of course they're Yotzei. And that's the mitzvah lechatchila. But those that light inside are also Yotzei Yedei Chayva. So before going any further, let me just share with you, I light 2 Chanukias. I light inside and outside. It's not a psak. It's not even a recommendation. It's a strange minhag. I know that. Even totally normal people, like I consider myself to be, are entitled to have some strange minhagim. That's my entitlement. And let me explain why I light inside and outside. I light inside because that is minhag avoisai and minhag raboisai. And I think it is of greatest importance to uphold and to cherish minhag avois. Minhag avois are a big yesod in Yiddishkeit. Twice in Shas, Psochim Dafnun Chulin Tzaddik Gimel, Chazal say, minhagim are binding, minhagim are part of Torah. And we learn the essence of minhagim from a posuk in Mishlei, Al titosh Torahs imecha. And that is why I light inside. It is what my parents and forefathers did. It is what my great Rebbe did. And it is a minhag which I want to pass on to my children and to coming generations. I light outside because I see no reason in the world not to be Makayim mitzvahs na Chanukah behiduro k'fi shekavu Chazal, like it's in the Gemara, like it's in Rambam, like it's in Shulchan Aruch. And that is the Ikar Pesuma Nisa. Yes, it is true that for 1,000 years the minhag was to light indoors, not al Pesach beisor mebachutz. And we find this minhag in all the Rishonim, Toises and Rosh, and Rashbo and Ritva, and Or Zarua, and Sheboile Haleket, and the Meiri, and everyone, up to the days of the Ramah. That was in Golus. Many times, it really fit into Chazal's definition, B'shas HaSakona. Many times in Golus it was a Sakona. Even if it wasn't a Sakona, yes, we were living amongst Goyim. We were afraid. They might have stole the menorahs, turned them over. They might have thrown rocks. We were in Golus. The Or Zarua Shin Chov Gimel Masechet Shabbos really wonders. He writes, where we live, there is no sakana. I don't know why we don't light outside, but we don't. So, we're definitely yoitze when you don't light outside. I may want to make that clear. And I have many rayas from the Ritva, from the Rashba. But we're living in Eretz Yisrael, amongst our own. Why not be Makayim this mitzvah like Chazal wanted us to do, like it's in the Rambam, like it's in the Shiur, Al Pesach Beisim Mebachutz. Yes, it's not the minhag of Avoseinu, but our forefathers were there, and we are here. I do not recommend in Brooklyn, or in Tallahassee, or in Vancouver, or wherever you live, to start lighting outside. No, in Golus, minhag Avoseinu biyadenu. In Eretz Yisrael, I think we should light outside, and that is why I light inside and I light outside as well. People always ask me, where does the Rav make the brocha? And that is an interesting question. I make the brocha inside, but I light the candle outside without any hefsek. I live on ground floor, so to me it's just 10 seconds from this door to that door. So I say the brochas, and I light all the candles inside, and before saying Haneres Alolu She'onu Madlikin, I light the first candle outside, and after the first candle outside, I say Haneres Alolu, so there's no hefsek. So the brocha I say is valid for both lightings, for both Chanukahs. I also have a practical reason for lighting inside, but that is totally practical. I have 3 beautiful Chanukahs. One is a very big one. When I came to Yerushalayim, I got a gift. A beautiful, big menorah. And the person that gave me the gift, I don't know up to this day who he was. It was Be'ilum Shem. And I appreciate that. So I usually like that one. I have a beautiful Chanukah, not as big, that I received as a chassan from my Kala, my late wife, Zechroin Avrocha. So that has special sentimental value to me. And this year, I lit Ner Chanukah in that one. A month ago, my mother passed away, as you all know. And 7 of us brothers sat around the table, and we divided amongst us the clay kesef and the clay kodesh that they had at home, and I got the Chanukah. Tonight is my father's yortzeit, so tonight I will be lighting in that Chanukah, in that menorah. I won't light outdoors, outside with these menorahs, because I don't want to be oiva and lifnei lo sit and michshor, and I don't want anybody passing on the street to have the temptation of just picking up such a beautiful menorah. Some crazy person might have the temptation of having Rav Moshe Weiss's menorah, so I want that light, that one outside. That is an additional practical reason why I light inside. But that's not the ikar. The ikar is minigavas on one hand, and shleimus ha'maisa, shleimus ha'mitzvah on the other hand. So as I said, I think most Rishonim maintain afilu shelo b'shas hakona yoytze inside. My time is very limited today because I have so many shiurim to give today. But I have a rai from the Rashba, from the Ritva, which I won't share with you right now, in Minchas Osha and Chanukah. Please look it up. But all the Rishonim that write, our minig is to light inside. That proves beyond doubt. In most of the places, there was no real sakana. We weren't killed for lighting Ner Chanukah. We weren't shot, we weren't murdered for lighting Ner Chanukah outside. So obviously, the minig was, we won't be killed, but it might arouse anti-Semitism. We might pay a price for it. The fact was that we light outside, and therefore we lit inside, and therefore it's clear to me, you're yoitz inside. However, the Rambam holds like Rav Elyashiv, and I want to tell you how I reached that conclusion. If you're going to learn the Rambam, you won't reach that conclusion. So this is an opportunity for me to teach how to learn Rambam. There's a famous story I tell from time to time because the story has an important moral. So the story goes, a person came to Reb Chaim Brisker, a resident in Brisk, that he wants to call the Chevra Kedisha to a Din Torah. His father-in-law, Elena, passed away in the very early hours of the morning. Another person of the community passed away 2-3 hours later, but the Chevra Kedisha buried the second person to pass away before they took care of his father. So he wants to call them to Din Torah. Reb Chaim was shocked, takes out a Rambam Hilchas Ovel, he looks in the Rambam and he responds in a strange way. Reb Chaim says, Hem nahagu shaloi keshura. They did the wrong thing, but you don't have a taina. Person didn't understand. If they did the wrong thing, why can't they call them to Din Torah? He goes home. He learns the very same Rambam that Reb Chaim learned. He made a point to look at the Rambam where Reb Chaim is learning. Comes back to Reb Chaim 2 hours later and he asks, Meichen Dantuni, I learned the Rambam that the Rav learned. The Rambam says nothing about this. So what do you mean they did the wrong thing, but I don't have a taina? Reb Chaim says, I'll explain to you. Tayir Yid, I'll explain to you. Shulchan Aruch clearly says, we should bury the Mesim that died first. First to pass away is the first to be taken care of. Yesh lehistapik. What is the origin? What is the Hagdorah? What is the reasoning of this halacha? Is it a din in Kvoid HaMeis? It's not Kvoid HaMeis to let him just lay around. Is it a din in Kvoid HaMeis, or is it a din in Kedima b'mitzvah? It's a general halacha. Any mitzvah that is chal on a person before mitzvah number 2, first you need to be Mekayim mitzvah number 1 before you move on to the second mitzvah. So I decided, if it's a din in Kvoid HaMeis, the Rambam needs to bring it in Hilchos Ovel. That is where the Rambam brings all the halachas of Kvura, of Hesped, or the halachas of Kvoid HaMeis. If it's a general mitzvah regarding Kedima b'mitzvahs, it doesn't need to be in Hilchos Ovel. I looked for it in the Rambam, I didn't find it, so my conclusion is, it's a din in Kedima b'mitzvahs. They did the wrong thing. But you don't have a taina. It has nothing to do with your father, it has nothing to do with you, it has nothing to do with Kvoid HaMeis. There was no diminishing Kvoid HaMeis, and therefore you don't have a taina. That's genius. That's a spark of genius. We learn the Rambam between the lines. We learn what the Rambam doesn't write, and not only what he does write. And to me, that's a big yesod. And I have many halachas which are based on similar rayas. But now I want to teach you something that the Rambam does write. He does write it, but nobody sees it. And let me explain. As I mentioned before, the Rambam dedicates 2 prokim to Hilchos Chanukah. Perek Gimel is Dinei Halal, and in only Perek Daled does the Rambam write the halachas of Adlukas Haner. There is one halacha, and only one halacha in Adlukas Haner that is in Perek Gimel, not in Perek Daled. And why is that? So the Rambam, Perek Gimel, before he gives us halachas, either of halal or of Adlukas Haner, the Rambam just gives a brief description. What is Chanukah all about? What transpired? What happened? So the first 2 halachas in Perek Gimel are the story of Chanukah. Gezeres Hayavonim, the war, the victory of the Chashmonoim, and then in Halacha Gimel the Rambam writes, ומפני זה התקינו חכמים שבאויסי הדור, שיהיו 8 ימים אלה שתחילוסן חופי בכסלו ימי שמחה והלל, ומדליקן בהן נרויס בערב על פסחי הבתים. Why does the Rambam write where in Perek Gimel? Why doesn't he wait till Perek Daled to write mitzvah lahadlek al Pesach beisoy mebachutz, like the Gemara does? It is the only halacha which we find in Perek Gimel. My conclusion is, al Pesach Abatim is not just one more halacha. It's not a halacha like lamala miyesa mama lamata masoret vochem chotzer sheyesh bo shnei chatzeres chaloin somach l'shus arabim tefach somach lepesach shemen zayis. It's not a halacha. It's not a detail like all the others. That is the ikar takona. That is the ikar takona. Sheyehu madlikim nerois al pischa abatim bekol laila v'laila. Just like Chanukah's 8 days. 8 days is not just another halacha. That is Aleph Beis. That is the fundamental takana. So is Pischei Habatim. So my conclusion from the Rambam is Pesach Beisum Abechitz is Ma'akev B'di'eved, because that is the Ikar HaTakana. So we must assume B'shas HaSakona Manichal Shalchona V'dayoy is a real Sakona and only B'shas HaSakona. Rav Eliashiv doesn't bring this, but I think the Rambam is a raya l'shitosoi, aval ein haloche kemoisoi. Because the way I understand the Tur, and many, many other Rishonim, as I explained just 5 minutes ago, even shaloi b'shas hakona yoyotze bifnim. We still need an explanation why Chasidim like dafke bifnim. Why is it better than Pesach Beisor Mebachutz? But that'll be in another opportunity. I apologize. Let's hope. Shnas Tov Shei Pei Gimel. Hopefully Mashiach will come. I hope that when Mashiach will come, our site will still carry my shiurim. I hope he won't send me away. I hope Kol HaLashon will be kind enough to carry my shiurim, even though we'll have a flood of the greatest Gedolim of all the ages who will look at me. But let's hope. So Tov Shin Pei Gimel, we have a lot to discuss. Let's go back to our fundamental sugya. So I say, when and where depend on why. When and where depend on why. It depends on the most fundamental question. Is Ner Chanukah all about persumenes, or is it also about zeichalenes? Rambam l'shitosoi. Le'achar shekol tzarregel menashuk, there is no mitzvah. L'shitosoi Pesach Habayis is ma'akev even b'di'eved. The way I understand the Rambam, and that is why it's the only halacha that is in Perek Gimel even before we start learning the halachas of Adlukas Haner. Pischei Habatim is Aleph Beis. That is the Ikar Takona, just like Kol Laila Ve'Laila. Tu l'shitosoi. And now comes the punchline. And I think this is so powerful. Going back to the Rambam, Halacha Gimel. Kishe Gavru Yisrael Aleveim. No, Halacha Gimel. Mipnei zed kinu chomesh b'yoyse dor. Shmoines yomim eile. Yemei simcha v'halal. Umadlikin b'neres. Be'erev al pischei batam v'kolayla v'layla mishmoines alaylois. Laharois ulegalois haneis. Laharois ulagalois anes. What does that mean? Persume nisa. It's not for yourself. To show, to reveal. Laharois ulagalois anes. It's all about persume nisa. What does the Torah write? V'yan ki ira hanes b'neirois. Tiknu lahadlek neirois b'kol layla. Kedei lahazkir hanes. Rabbi said, do you see the difference? The Rambam writes laharois ulagalois. Torah writes lahazkir. Torah Shitosai, number 3. Ner Chanukah is first of all zeichel hanes. Only secondary persumenis. Torah Shitosai. The Rambam writes, why do we like Ner Chanukah? Kedei laharois ulagalois hanes. It's all about persumenis. And that is why b'chutz v'lo b'fnim. Ad shetishke regal v'lo achar kach. Rambam l'shitosei, Torah l'shitosei. And therefore my psak is, just like we paskin, you could make a brocha adarois shacha, you could make a brocha even if you light b'fnim. And that is a vindication and a support of minhag chasidim. But we still need an explanation. Why is b'fnim preferable? Why wouldn't we like b'chutz? And that'll be in another opportunity. You could learn it in Minchas Rosh Chanukah, Moyadim Chelik Beis. So, this is a very fundamental sugya and a very fundamental yesoid in Hilchas Ner Chanukah, which I hope you all cherish and you all enjoy. I just want to say a few words about the Pnimius of Ner Chanukah. So the Yevonim were Goyzik Zedis. They weren't out to annihilate, to murder, to kill, to destroy. Those were the Messiavanim. They wanted to culture us, to give us intelligence, to give us culture, to give us enlightenment. So the very first Medrash in Parshas Bereshith, V'choshech al pnei ha'tohom, V'choshech zo yoven. That's remarkable. The Greeks were giants. In their day and age, there was the greatest empire. And they brought many gifts to the world. The greatest early philosophers were the Greeks. So Athens gave us philosophy, Sparta gave us the Olympics, sports, architecture, art, literature, poetry. All the light they gave to the nations are darkness to us. Do you know who the first Jewish historian was? Nobody would guess. Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta, the great Tana. Seder Oilem Rabosi. It's the first comprehensive history, quoted twice in Shas Bavli in Yevomis and Anida. And it's a very brief history from the first day of creation till the days of the Tanoim. Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta was one of Chameshes Rabbeinu Shebedorim, Talmid Rebbe Kiva. When it comes to Chanukah, he says there was a great Greek hero, a Greek king, and his name was Alexandros. Chazal call him Alexander Mogdon. He was Alexander the Macedonian. To the world, he's known as Alexander the Great, one of the biggest conquerors. Alexander studied by Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher. And the Greeks brought light to the world. To us, they brought destruction and sakona and devastation. Gazru Gezerois. Why? The Prima Godam is very interesting. Prima Godam writes in the beginning of Erchas Chanukah, the Yevonim kinu b'bnei Yisrael. They were envious. Why were they envious? They were the greatest military power, the greatest empire. What did they have to be Makana Jews? Yes, they were cultured. They were more intelligent than all their predecessors, than all the others. They loved literature, and they knew to appreciate books, and that's why they were envious. They saw this ancient and relatively small people, small minority in their empire. But they saw what study means to us. Rabbi Shiur ben Gamla was the first in history to develop, to establish a public schooling system funded by the community to ensure that every child learns Torah. No other nation in the world besides us, before us, never cherished study, cherished learning like we do. And that is what made the Greeks envious. And that's why there was Seder Olam, when it comes to Chanukah, mentions Alexander. And then there is an amazing passage, which is a riddle and a mystery. B'yomav botlo hanevu'o, mekan ve'elech hatei oznachu lishmo et divrei chachamim. In the days of Alexander, prophecy came to an end. And from now on, hatei oznachu lishmo et divrei chachamim. What does it have to do with Chanukah? What does this mean? The Gaon was the only Achron with his unbelievable greatness in Torah. He was a sage above and beyond Bnei Doiroi. And he wrote Hagos on the entirety of Torah Shebal Peh. Shishis Mishnah, Babli, Yerushalmi, Sifru, Sifri, Tosefta, Sifri D'Tzniasa. He also has Hagos on Seder Olam, because it's a Tana. And he adds on, Botla Nevuah, let me share with you what I think about this Gaon and about the Seder Olam. Up to the days of Chanukah, Yetzer the Avodah Zorah was prevalent and powerful. The countermeasure to Avodah Zorah was Nevuah. Avodah Zorah is Sheker and Nevuah is Emes. That coincided, not coincidence, with Bittul HaNevuah. And we're facing a new challenge, the challenge of beauty, the challenge of culture. Nevuah would no longer be relevant. It would no longer be enough. To counter culture, you need a superior culture. To counter Chochmah Shel Sheker, you need Chochmah Shel Emes. You need beauty that is far more beautiful, and far more radiant than what anyone else has to offer. B'yomav botla hanavuah k'shebotlu yitzra d'avodah zorah. But the Greeks brought light to the nations, darkness to us, and the only counterbalance and countermeasure would be mekan ve'elach hatei oznachu lishmoya divrei chachomim. Our Chachamim, not theirs. Our philosophy and not theirs. Our Torah, which outshines any other Chacham in the world. Why was Nes Chanukah in the menorah? The Avonim desecrated all the clay Migdosh. The very name Chanukah is Al Shem Chanukah HaMizbeach. They broke the Mizbeach. They desecrated and defiled everything. Timu kol hashmanim. Why was the Neis Davka in the menorah? Because menorah represents Torah. The three fundamental kelim in the Beis HaMikdash. Menorah is Torah, Mizbeach is Avodah, Shulchan is Chesed, Torah Avodah Gemel is Chosodim. The Avonim were out to take away our Torah, Lashkichim Torah Secho, and they knew why. They knew why. Because as long as we are Dovik b'Torah, we need no other culture. We need no other light. We need no other chachma. Because what we have is far greater and far brighter and far outshines anything else in the world. And that is why the Nes was in the menorah, and not in the menorah, but in Shem and Zayas Shebe menorah. Because the Gemara in Brochus in the beginning of Perek HaRoya says, Haroya Shem and Zayas b'chaloim yitzapa l'mo'or Torah. The light of Torah, not the light of the Greeks, not the darkness of the Greeks, not Choshech al Pnei Atoim Zayavan. Shem and Zayas, Yitzapa lema'or Torah, the beauty of Torah, the light of Torah, the simcha of Torah. That is what Chanukah is all about. And that was those Neiros Chanukah which shine. And they shine with the Aragonus Shenignaz B'Torah. As I mentioned, tonight is my late father's yortzeit, 6 years since he passed away. And those of you that knew my father was a beacon of light of Torah. He was a businessman. He wasn't a Klei Kodesh. Reb Moshe tried very hard to convince my father to be a Rav. He wasn't successful. Don't know why. My father was a businessman. He was a builder, but he was Davak and Torah. He was a tremendous Ilui. And what he shared with us and what he gave us was Simchas HaTorah. Seeing the light of Torah and sharing Simchas HaTorah and Chedves HaDeshmaitza. And that is ultimately what Chanukah is about. So, Be'ezus Hashem Yisborach, we should always be able to share the beauty of Torah, Simchas HaTorah, Chedves HaDeshmaitza, and we should be Zorchel Hagdil Torah U'Ladira. And the Or HaGones that shines and emanates from the Neiras Chanukah should light our minds and our hearts, and we should always be Zoicha Lahagdil Torah U'Ladira. Sheniske Bekora B'Yameinu, to see the Kohen Gadol Madlik Es HaNeiras B'Menoras Hamor B'Beis HaMikdash B'Bias Goel Tzedek B'Mheiro V'Yameinu Amen. Have a beautiful Chanukah.